Hi, it's Alistair Grigg here again from Fastman. Thank you for joining me on the second of these three videos regarding Permissions Manager. Let's talk Permissions Manager. Today we're going to focus on the change activities, how to act on permissions in a content suite or extended ECM. So last time just to revisit, we went through the intro. We described how you can navigate your way around the product and how you can see and understand permissions or access that's in place on your system. Today we're going to focus on the second of our high-level use cases, which is about how to act on permissions. So make changes, remove, replace, roll back, these sorts of things. So there's a lot of functionality in this area on the product, so we need to make sure we get started quickly. So let's move on. Thank you. Okay, so by way of a quick review, we have our dashboard. As you can see in front of you with the Smart View, and in the Smart View you have the ability to be able to expand and collapse and view the permissions that are in place on items, whether they're a folder or a collection or a workspace or a document itself, whatever it is, you'll be able to see that in the dashboard. And as a reminder, the dashboard can work on pretty much any container in the system, which is pretty handy. Today we're going to be focusing on the ability to be able to change. So we need to go to the advanced functions over here, which is the classic dashboard or classic view dashboard of Permissions Manager. And the reason we go here is because there's a lot of functionality in this part of the system or part of the product, which is best done from the classic view. And you can see that the buttons that are appearing on the top of the dashboard, things like copy and rollback, choose radio button between replace and copy. These are all things that are related to being able to act on permissions rather than being able to just view and understand. So if we just do a little revision here, remember we had three high-level use cases. We had the first use case, which was about being able to understand and to see permissions that are in place across your system and to be able to relay that, for example, to auditors and other people in the organization and make that available to the business. The second high-level use case we're tackling today is the ability to be able to act on permissions. So to make changes, as I mentioned in the introduction. So that's where we're going to focus today. The third high-level use case, which will be the subject of the third video in this series, is the ability to be able to do advanced features or functions, like being able to work with roles, like being able to work with templates, and like being able to work with virtual permissions, and also all the administration controls functions or control functions that exist, both for business admins and system admins. And we'll talk about that in the third video. By the very nature of the product, we do have to touch on some of those features today. So where I need to touch on them, I'll make sure that I call it out, and so you don't get confused about what is an advanced feature and what is a fairly straightforward act or change process or function. So without slowing down too much, let's get moving. So remember, we've got the dashboard. Now we have our display here of all of the permissions that are in place for an object for its children. And we have the differentiator being identified by the color coding of the individual items. So we can see, for example, here that the corporate services folder is different to the Permissions Manager folder above it. And that exists in the Smart View as well as the Classic View, so that's really handy to know. You can see that all these ticks or flags on the right-hand side, these checkboxes are all color-coded, so we see all that in the dashboard. Let's assume, though, that we want to make a change. Let's assume that we've decided that we want to add a group or a user to a structure or to an item. You'll see that the very first thing that's different to, I'm just going to switch over to our item views, item permissions. The very first thing you'll see is that on the right-hand side, you have an edit permissions button. Very similar to what you'll see in the standard product, but a bit more functionality and some interesting little pieces of information that you don't get in the standard product out of the box that only come through Permissions Manager. The first thing that stands out to me is that the ability to be able to modify multiple items at once. So if I wanted to change the permissions for the default group, for example, on this folder, just this one folder, I could come in here and I can just make a change and say I'm going to remove it down to CC contents, just to remove all the other access that can be made, the add items and so on. I could then come along and say, okay, I'm going to increase the permissions of the Demo C CEO group to full edit permissions on this item. And you'll see that as soon as I do that, you'll see that it actually removes this little redundant flag. The redundant flag is only displayed through the edit permissions screen. Really, really helpful though, because it tells you that line item is actually redundant. That ACL entry is actually redundant. So it gives you straight away some visibility. And if I just go through and reset that back where it was, you can see that I've got the redundant flag showing up on this Demo C CEO, and it actually gives you a clue as to where that redundancy is coming from, which is pretty handy. And if you look at it below, you can see that the General Manager group has got the ability to be able to modify as well as the ability to be able to just CNC contents. If I increase this to, as I did before, to edit permissions, that redundancy is removed because now the Demo C CEO group has got higher level of access than the General Manager group. So really simple, straightforward. That's a really simple example of how you make a change to permissions on an item. And you can see straight away it comes back and it refreshes the screen, and you can see that those changes have been applied. So the Demo C CEO group's now got the ability to be able to edit permissions on the Permissions Manager folder. Fairly aggressive permissions level there. What I would like to do though is I'd like to make that change to items below it. And if you recall, out of the box, the standard functionality is really simply to say, make this change and push it down to items below it. Or that's pretty much it. What I can do here though, using Permissions Manager, is I can come through and I can say, I just want to apply that one change I made to certain areas of the taxonomy below the Permissions Manager folder. So in this case, I'm going to just apply it to the Human Resources and to the Legal group. Now I'm being totally random here in my selection, and I'll show you how we can use the rollback function a little bit later on to undo these changes. And so the fact that I'm making these changes without making notes or without keeping track of what I'm doing is largely irrelevant to the use of Permissions Manager. So anyway, so there we go. So we're going to come along. I've selected those items, and then I'm going to go copy permissions. And it's now going to give me a little bit more in terms of information that I need to, or options I need to work with. So I can say, for example, here that I want to just apply this to documents or folders or all types. And by way of explanation, this little list that you're seeing here comes from the administration functions of the product. So as a system administrator, you can come in here and say that I don't want users to be able to make changes to anything but documents, for example, or anything but folders. I can also manage the number of levels that they're able to push it down to. So this cascade button here says I want to push it to all levels or just 2 levels, which is really handy when you've got a well-defined access model in your system. So I'm just going to push it down to all types, and I'll cascade it to everything in the Human Resources and Legal folder. So let's just execute that. So I'll select all types. And now I'm going to click the preview button, which will give me a perspective of what changes I'm going to make, how many items are going to be affected by this change. You can see there's 163 items in the Human Resources and 14. The point about the product is we're trying to make it as easy to use and as quick to use as possible. So rather than have to go to selective items, make changes, write scripts, all that sort of stuff, you just do it out of the box. So we're just running through that at the moment. It's not taking very long, and it's done. So now if I go to that folder and I look at the Human Resources folder, you can see the Demo C CEO has now got full edit permissions rights. But if you just scroll up a little bit and look at Corporate Services, that doesn't actually apply there, so that's easy. In fact, I don't even know if Demo C CEO was in the Human Resources folder before. So there you go, it's been done. So really straightforward, really simple. And if you recall from last week, I can run a report against that, and I can find out what changes have been made. And you can see that today it's the 9th of September. That's the date we've recorded this video, and the old permissions were 0. So we actually added the group to that folder. It wasn't there beforehand. So just a really small example of what you can do to use the copy function. If you wanted to make a change that was more expansive, so for example, you needed to go through and completely remove permissions from a folder and then also replace them with the permissions from its parent or from another location, that's actually just as easy. You can come along here and you can click on, for example, let's do it a little bit differently. Let's just choose the corporate services folder and you'll see the radio button. I click on replace and you'll see it changes. I'll just go back and do it again. You can see that copy permissions becomes a replace permissions, and you can come down here and all of a sudden you can just make a quick change. Now, really, really simple, really easy, and as you might have sort of suspect, a little dangerous at times. So I'm going to show you on the next video how you control access to these features. Not everybody needs to have access to these features, but it's really handy for those people who do need it. And don't forget that when you're using Permissions Manager, you can only ever do what your standard permissions or access allows you to do anyway. So if you as a user don't have edit permissions rights on these items, you can't make these changes regardless of what's been set up inside the Permissions Manager admin settings. So that's really important to understand. So I'm logged on as the admin here, and you'll see that I can pretty much do anything, but a lot of users can't, and that's a really important thing to know. In fact, I'll show you a little bit later on another user trying to use Permissions Manager and what they can and can't do with the product. So anyway, I've come along, I've said I want to replace the permissions. I'm going to pick up the permissions from the parent and apply that to corporate services, just as I did before with the copy function. Come along here, same sort of thing, a little bit more options. In here, you've got the ability to retain existing owner and roles, owner settings and roles, which you didn't see in the same basic concept. Very easy for people to get used to using, very easy for you to be able to train people on using it. Let me leave those things in place. Actually, no, I'll remove those because I'm going to try and make it look exactly the same. So we'll go through here. Corporate services, I don't know how many items we've got in here. It's not that big a folder, it's pretty small, 166. So replace permissions. So what it's doing now, instead of the copy, it's completely removing permissions from the corporate services folder and applying everything from the parent folder, from the location that we've been working from. So, but these are still fairly basic, simple permissions management or Permissions Manager Act functions or change functions. There's not really much complexity here. It's just really maybe making things more efficient, more consistent, and letting you have a bit more confidence about what you're doing. So 166 done. So as I've said before, it does use a lot of the underlying standard open text functions, so we just leverage all of those rather than recreating them again. So here we are. You can see that the color now for corporate services has gone to white rather than blue, and that tells me straight away that the permissions on the corporate services folder are exactly the same as the Permissions Manager folder above it. And I could again run a report, same thing, run the report to show the audit records if I wanted confidence, and you can see here's all the changes that have taken place. And if I scroll down, you can see quite a few changes took place. So we removed permissions, we applied permissions, and all of those were recorded in the audit trail and are reportable. So very simple, very straightforward. Now let's assume that I made a mistake. Let's assume that as a user, I came along and said, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I did something wrong, or another user came along and did something wrong. You might have noticed as we were doing this, we have this rollback permissions button up here, which is a really popular part of the product and really powerful. So what rollback does is we call it our oops button. So it lets you come along and undo the changes that have been made. Now it does it to a point in time. So if somebody comes along and makes a change and they say, hey, I didn't mean to make that change, you can just say, when did you make the change? And I'll go back to that point in time and roll back. So if I just select corporate services, again, the same folder we had a minute ago, and I click on rollback, remember I'm working on Pacific time here, US Pacific time. So today it's the system's saying the 9th of September because it's actually operating in a Australian time zone, but it knows that I'm the user, so it's saying I'm 10:46 is the current time. So I'm just going to roll back to 10:15. say just 10:15. So at the start of this this little part of the video. And again, same sort of options, a lot of granularity here about what you can change and what you can see. You can push it down to a number of levels. All that type of control is available to the end user or to the person doing these actions. So again, I'm going to do it on all types. If I'd, for example, just wanted to make that change on documents before, I could have just said, okay, I'm going to roll it back on folders and leave the documents as they are. There's a lot of flexibility. I won't go into all the different options here, but hopefully you're getting a feel for the sorts of things we can do with the product. And all this is Permissions Manager. This is all Fastman Permissions Manager going on. Now you'll see that there's a lot of information displayed on the right. And what it's doing here is it's giving you a preview of the changes that it's about to roll back. And on the right hand side, every one of these items, for example, this folder here, or this document here, there are actually, ironically, there are multiple copies of the same document in this taxonomy, which is why they're showing up here multiple times. It's not because it's doubling up on the display, it's just because there are multiples of the same document in this part of the system. But if I click on the details here, you can see that report we just saw, the web report that we just ran, we can get into it and we can actually see that that's happening. These are the changes that are going to be undone. And these are all the changes that took place just a minute or two ago when I did that replace function. So that's available for all items before you hit the rollback button. So you can validate and check to make sure you're happy with all those changes, and then you can click on rollback. And it's hands off at this point. I don't need to get click all the time. I just let the system do its thing, confident that it's doing it accurately, and it's using the history or the audit data that the system collects on these changes. So it does take a second or two, and if it's a large structure, it can take a minute or two to run this, but at the same time, there is no other way of doing it. It's the only mechanism that I'm aware of to be able to make a change like that, or to roll back or undo permissions. And bear in mind, as I said before, you can do all that as a administrator, or as a power user, or as a business administrator. So you don't have to have that available to everybody. You can restrict access to the rollback permissions function to just specific people in the organization. Anyway, I'm very conscious of time. We need to keep moving along. Hopefully you're getting a feel for what we can do. You might have noticed also that there is this virtual permissions button here. This little gray bar. When we started this was orange. If I just switch on that, again, it goes back to orange. The reason that exists is because when I go to edit permissions, and I'm going to go into this in some detail next video, I have the ability to be able to select templates, and I can go in here and pick up a template which has got a predefined set of permissions that I've decided to use or make available. So in this case, for example, I can come in here and pick up what we call in the legal hold team permissions template, which gives me certain access and remove certain access. And I could then apply that to the items through the same replace copy functions that we just saw. However, as I said, that's going to be something we feature next week on our more advanced features video. Just touching on it now in case you're wondering what that bar means. The next thing I am going to do, though, is I'm going to talk a bit about the remove and replace users function. Now, this function is available across all of the displays, so you can see it in the search results. We saw the search results in the first video last week. It's also available in other containers, such as as collections, which we are going to cover in this video in a minute. So this is a really, really nice little feature. So it gives you the ability to be able to go and remove and replace users or groups on specific items or on a tree, if you like, or an area of the system, which is really good for onboarding and offboarding. So for example, if I'm coming along and I say, I want to take out, if I find actually, I'll just use the Fastman demo user ID. Again, remember, type ahead, all this sort of stuff which we forget about. I want to remove the Fastman demo from anywhere. So we call it remove and replace. The little button at the bottom doesn't actually change. It's text. It stays replace user always. But you have a button here which says remove. So what I'm basically doing here is I'm telling the system or the product to go into everything below Fastman Permissions Manager and remove any instance of Fastman demo on either a I think it's the owner or whatever, anywhere basically. So I'm removing it anywhere, and that's what I'm going to do. So very simple, very straightforward. I click on the button. I can say at the bottom here what types of documents, same as I had on the remove and replace. So we try and keep the interface consistent. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing change, replace, rollback, remove, replace users. You'll find the same sort of controls or the options pop up in multiple places. Now I will take it out on all the sub items, so you've got a little bit extra control there again. So what I'm going to do is say replace. Now I actually don't know how many instances of Fastman demo are on this system. So there's only one. That was a simple example, wasn't it? Oh no, it's still going. Still processing, so we got up to 400. It skipped. Yeah, there's only one so far. Fastman demo is only actually explicitly. So let's choose another one in a second. We'll try another one because it gives you a better example. We'll do Fastman staff. Oh no, we've found more, 5. So it's found 5 instances where Fastman demo as a user, as opposed to a group membership, is on an ACL entry in the system. So it's really quite straightforward. It's done. So only 5 instances, but everywhere it found Fastman demo, it's come along and replaced it. Now, let's assume that I don't want to remove, but I just want to replace. So let's look at, let's have a look at Fastman staff. We'll look at Fastman staff, oops, the group, Fastman staff, and I want to replace it with, what should I call it? Demo. I'm just going to replace it with the, what have we got here? Demo ICT. There they are. This is totally random because don't forget I've got the rollback function available, so I can come back to it afterwards and clean all this up, which is what we'll do before we finish. So I remove. I'm going to leave it as it is. I've got options again. Replace all, only the owner. So I'm only looking for where Fastman staff's the owner of something. Let's just do that actually, rather than. No, we won't. We'll just use the ACL. Replace only ACL. So we're going to leave all the ownership in place. If Fastman staff's an owner of an item or a folder or whatever, I'm going to leave it in place. All types. In this case, let's just do it on folders. So we're replacing owner when we only ACL. So let's look it on documents. Okay, just so we've been quite selective. Replace user, and again, same thing goes away. And does a quick query assessment up front. Here it goes. So it skipped 35. Oh, actually, the last one I did was wrong. I was reading it the wrong way around, wasn't I? I was reading, I think I was updated. Anyway, so it's going through. It does take a second or two. There's not a huge number of items here. This is not a big system. And it's just running on a little small VM in the Azure cloud. So it's working. So updated 462. Wow. So ACL entries, it's found 462 ACL entries out of 600 with Fastman staff. So imagine if you had to sit down and go through that by hand or do a query. It just takes forever. So it's going along. 1,000. Ooh, how big is this system? 1,072, updated 638, so skipped 434. This is just documents too, not folders. It's done. Okay, I missed that. Okay, so that's done. So now let's just go back and let's do that query. Remember we had the effective use Fastman staff. Fastman staff. Here it is. I just want to find out where Fastman staff is in the system, and it's just in these workspaces. Okay, so it's cancel. So it's actually got membership of those items. So it is the owner of this by the look of it. So now I've put in the effective permissions. Apply that. So we've still got effective permissions coming in here, and you can see, yeah, the owner group is the owner user is the Fastman staff. So that's where it's coming from. So that's what it is. Anyway, so we're able to do that very quickly. And as I mentioned before, I won't bore you with it right now. We're very conscious of time. If I wanted to undo that and just replace it, I just go to the top level and say replace. sorry, roll back, and it's done. But anyway, I wanted to just move on a little bit. The other area that's really important is the ability to be able to do collections. So all these change functions I mentioned before, you can do the remove, replace users in the search in the search results, which is really, really handy. But just as impressively or just as usefully, you can do it in collections. So let's just do that. Let's create a collection. Let's go back to the enterprise workspace and let's create a collection. What I'm going to do is use the advanced search function, and I'm just going to look for any document with the word passport in it, which is a sort of search anywhere. So we haven't got that many, 17 items, really small. So scrolled. Okay, so I'm going to select all, and I'm going to add to collection. I think there's a way, there is a way I think you can add every item to the collection, but I'm just going to use the ones that I can see in front of me. So add to collection, and I'm going to create a new, I'm going to call it items with passport in them. Okay, I'm going to add it to my, and I'm going to submit that. Okay, and I'm going to open the collection. So here we have a collection, if you can see this. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just go back to my personal collections, and you can see items with passport in them is here, just created, and I can run permissions manager on that. So you can see here I've got permissions manager. So for example, what I want to do here is I want to be able to find where has anyone got access, or is there anyone in the Fastman staff group got access. So again, I'm going to use the same thing I had before, and actually I might have, because I removed Fastman staff, it may not be very effective, this. And again, yes, correct. The point is though that you are able to, use these change functions from inside a collection in exactly the same way that you can do it for a normal item or a folder structure. So you can see in this case, these items are in different places in the system. And remember I mentioned before about the same document being in multiple places. So you can see that that's in here as well. So I can come through here, for example, and say I'm going to edit the permissions, and I want to, let's reapply Fastman staff, and I want to give, that's interesting. Let me think what's going to happen here. I want to give them read or write access, which is just using the simplified model. If I go to virtual permissions, oops, cancel, I think it changes that. So submit. So I've got that write access set. So I can just come along here and say Fastman staff. I'm going to apply Fastman staff to, and this is totally random. I'm not likely to do this thing in the real world, but I can apply Fastman staff to all of these items in this collection that have been found with the word passport in them. And I can give Fastman staff members the ability to be able to delete those items, which doesn't sound like a great thing to do, but let's keep going. All types and preview. So really I'm just trying to give you a feel for some of the things you can do with the change or act functions of permissions manager, and just give you a feel for how simple and straightforward it is. Now these collections, for example, sometimes that you might have noticed that, I'm not sure if there was a button popped up at the top of that. When I make a change, this is a small collection, so it doesn't give me an option up here, but there is an option up here to do it to entire collection. So if this collection had 50,000 objects in it, you can make that change to the entire collection at the time. So you don't have to, in fact, I think one of them actually does have, oops, manage collections. I think one of them has a lot of items. So for example, this methane one, permissions manager, it has, it's paginated, so there's a lot of items in this section. So it only brings up the first 10 because of a setting we've got in the permissions management or administration pages, but it's got the entire collection button here. So if I select that, you'll see it grays out the buttons, and it just lets you make a change to all the items in that collection, not just the ones that are displayed. Anyway, this has been a really quick run through some of the change functions that we have in the product. I did mention, I think in the first video, how we could use the compare groups functionality, so I won't redo that here. Next video, I will get into the templates and the virtual permissions in more detail so you can see how they work, and also get into the administration functions. So if you're interested in how to manage this product to make sure that it can be rolled out effectively to your user community or to particular business users, then I'll show you how to do that and how you can turn functions on or off. So there's quite a lot to cover. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. If you've got any questions, please send an email to info@fastman.com, or you can also put a question into the chat for this webinar. So thank you very much. We'll see you again.